At 300 a.m., you are unknowingly face to face with a serial killer. You don't know his name yet. You don't know how many people he has already hurt. All you know is that something about this stop will stay with you for the rest of your life. Years from now, when bodies are found across multiple states, this moment will be replayed in courtrooms, documentaries, and police briefings as the night it almost ended everything. The car shouldn't be there. A tan Volkswagen Beetle sits parked outside a dark house on an empty suburban street. No lights, no movement. When you slow down, the engine starts immediately and pulls away. That's enough. You turn on your lights and initiate the stop, unaware that the man behind the wheel has already perfected this situation. He pulls over calmly, too calmly. He steps out and apologizes before you speak. He's polite, educated, cooperative. He tells you he was out late watching a movie. The story is smooth, rehearsed, delivered without hesitation. He looks like someone people trust, someone neighbors wave at, someone who doesn't fit the picture of a violent criminal. And that's exactly why this works. You decide to search the car, not because you have proof, but because instinct is screaming. Inside, there's no blood, no weapon, no obvious crime scene. Instead, you find tools, gloves, rope, a ski mask, items that don't break the law but together form a picture you can't legally act on. Suspicion doesn't equal arrest. Fear doesn't hold up in court. So you document what you can. You write down his name, and you let him go. That decision won't feel ordinary for long, because this man will kill again. And when the truth finally comes out, this traffic stop won't be remembered as routine police work. It will be remembered as the moment a serial killer was caught and released by the rules meant to stop him. The man you stopped that night is already a predator. He has a system, he has targets, and he has learned that looking harmless is more effective than hiding. When you ask where he's coming from, he doesn't hesitate. He tells you he was at a movie theater. It's a lie, a small one, practiced, the kind designed not to be questioned. Inside the car are the tools of that system. Not evidence, not yet, but preparation. Gloves to avoid fingerprints, rope to restrain, a ski mask to erase identity, items that mean nothing in isolation and everything when viewed together. This is how he operates. He doesn't carry weapons that raise alarms. He doesn't break laws that stop him early. He stays just inside the lines because he knows most investigations fail long before a crime is proven. You record his name. At the time, it means nothing, but that name already exists in other files in other states attached to disappearances that haven't been connected yet. Women who were last seen talking to a polite stranger. Women who trusted someone who looked safe. Women who never made it home. Those reports are scattered, filed separately, buried in paperwork. No one has drawn the line between them yet, so he leaves. Not because he fooled you, because the system isn't built to act on patterns that haven't been assembled. He drives away knowing exactly what he can get away with, knowing he will have another chance, knowing the next woman won't see the warning signs you just missed. Later, when investigators finally piece it together, this stop won't be described as a failure. It will be described as an opportunity. One of the last moments when the crimes were still preventable. And the moment the serial killer learned that nothing was going to stop him. The pattern doesn't reveal itself all at once. It never does. At first, they're just missing persons reports. Separate cities, separate nights, separate jurisdictions that don't talk to each other fast enough. Young women who vanish after ordinary encounters. A ride offered. Help requested. A stranger who looks safe, sounds educated, and knows exactly how to lower a guard without raising suspicion. Witnesses describe the same man. Polite, soft-spoken, clean-cut. Someone who blends in so well that no one remembers him clearly until it's too late. He doesn't attack in the open. He doesn't rush. He isolates. He controls. He uses trust as the weapon, and by the time fear sets in, the situation is already unrecoverable. Behind the scenes, the crimes escalate. What begins as restraint turns into violence. What begins as violence turns into ritual. Bodies are moved. Evidence is scattered. Some victims are never found at all. Others are discovered months later, miles away from where they disappeared, leaving investigators with fragments instead of answers. Each case looks incomplete on its own. Together, they form something far worse. By the time detectives start noticing similarities, the timeline is already long. The geography has spread. The killer has grown confident. He's learned which risks are acceptable and which ones aren't. He knows when to stop talking. He knows when to leave town. He knows the system reacts slower than he moves. This is the cost of delay. Not one mistake, not one missed clue, but a series of crimes allowed to continue because no single moment looked dangerous enough. When the truth finally surfaces, it won't feel like a revelation. It will feel like confirmation of something that should have been obvious all along. By the time the cases begin to connect, the damage is already done. Investigators in different states start noticing overlaps that shouldn't exist by coincidence alone. Similar descriptions, similar timelines, similar methods. Women disappearing after brief encounters with a man who appears helpful, harmless, forgettable. A face that never triggers alarms, a name that slips through databases without stopping anyone long enough to act. Files are pulled, old reports are reread. Statements that once felt vague now sound precise. A traffic stop here, a witness description there, a suspect interviewed but released because nothing crossed the legal threshold. Each department had a piece of the picture. None of them had the whole thing. And without the whole thing, the killer stayed invisible. When the pattern finally emerges, it's unmistakable. The movements line up. The gaps make sense. What looked random was methodical. What looked opportunistic was planned. The killer wasn't improvising. He was adapting, learning how far he could go without being stopped, learning which rules protected him and which ones slowed everyone else down. At this stage, the investigation isn't about catching someone new. It's about realizing how long he's already been operating, how many times he passed close to detection, how many chances existed to interrupt the cycle before it became unstoppable. Each new discovery doesn't answer questions, it creates them. How did this go unnoticed? Who saw him last? Who spoke to him and walked away? When authorities finally understand who they're dealing with, the realization isn't shocking. It's sobering, because the evidence shows the truth clearly now. The killer wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was moving in plain sight, protected not by brilliance, but by fragmentation, delay, and a system that only sees patterns after enough people are already dead. What makes him effective isn't intelligence in the way people like to imagine it. It's discipline. He studies behavior. He watches how people respond to authority, politeness, and perceived vulnerability. He understands that violence doesn't begin with force, it begins with permission, and he knows exactly how to obtain it. He doesn't rush his victims. He approaches them in public places during daylight hours where danger feels impossible. College campuses, parking lots, busy streets. He presents himself as injured, inconvenienced, in need of help. A sling, crutches, a small request that costs nothing. The setup is simple because complexity draws attention. By the time suspicion appears, the situation has already shifted in his favor. Once control is established, the crime escalates quickly. Restraint replaces conversation. Isolation replaces safety. What happens next isn't impulsive. It follows a pattern that tightens with each offense. He learns which locations buy him time. He learns how long he can keep someone without attracting notice. He learns how to remove evidence efficiently enough to stay ahead of investigators who are still treating the cases as isolated events. This isn't chaos. It's refinement. Each successful crime reinforces the belief that the system can be navigated, manipulated, and delayed. Each failure to stop him confirms that belief. He doesn't need to outsmart law enforcement. He only needs to move faster than coordination allows. By the time authorities begin suspecting a serial offender, he has already evolved beyond the early risks. He's no longer experimenting. He's operating with confidence. The most dangerous phase isn't the beginning. It's the middle when the killer knows exactly who he is, what he can get away with, and how long it takes before anyone starts paying attention. The first real break doesn't come from brilliance. It comes from exposure. A survivor. A witness who remembers the face, the voice, the car. For the first time, the killer isn't just a theory moving across files. He's a person someone can point to. A lineup. A name spoken out loud. An arrest that looks briefly like the end. But it isn't. Because the charges don't match the scale of what he's done. Kidnapping instead of murder. A narrow conviction that ignores the bodies that haven't been found yet. The system moves carefully, deliberately, convinced it has time. And time is exactly what the killer knows how to exploit. While awaiting trial, he studies the process the same way he studied his victims. He learns schedules, he learns routines, he learns how much trust still exists inside secure buildings. When the opportunity appears, he doesn't hesitate. He escapes, not once, but again. And each escape isn't just a failure of containment, it's permission. Free again, the crimes resume immediately. Faster, more reckless. The restraint is gone. The risk tolerance shifts. What was once calculated becomes urgent. More victims. Less caution. A trail that grows impossible to ignore. Law enforcement scrambles to respond to a threat they believed was already neutralized. This is the most dangerous phase of all. Not when the killer is unknown, but when he's been caught and underestimated. Because at this point he's learned something irreversible, that even when the system closes its hands around him, there are still gaps wide enough to slip through. After the escape, the violence changes. The pauses disappear. There's no cooling off period, no return to careful selection. The killer moves with urgency, now driven by the knowledge that time is limited. He knows he's being hunted. He also knows that until he's physically stopped, nothing else matters. The attacks come faster. Locations shift. Victims are chosen for convenience, not planning. Some encounters end abruptly. Others leave behind survivors who can describe what happened, but not explain how it escalated so quickly. The pattern investigators hoped would slow instead spreads outward, crossing jurisdictions that are already struggling to keep up. Law enforcement responds with pressure, but pressure doesn't erase damage already done. Each new crime forces resources to stretch thinner. Every lead competes with another emergency. The investigation turns reactive chasing movement instead of predicting it. The killer stays ahead by staying mobile, leaving just enough chaos behind to overwhelm coordination. This phase is where the cost becomes undeniable. Not because the crimes are more brutal, but because they are more visible. The public becomes aware. Fear replaces disbelief. The question is no longer whether there is a serial offender, but how he was allowed to continue operating after being identified. By now, stopping him isn't about prevention. It's about containment. The opportunity to end the violence cleanly has passed. What remains is damage control, and the understanding that every delay from this point forward carries a measurable human cost. This isn't the only time the system comes close and misses. Years earlier, another stop happens in another state. A different officer. A different night. The circumstances look minor enough to dismiss. A young man pulled over. Awkward. Quiet. Strange but not criminal. No warrants. No alerts. No immediate reason to search further. So the encounter ends the way thousands of others do. A brief exchange. A release. A forgotten report. What the officer doesn't know is that there's a body in the vehicle. The first of many. A crime already committed, moving through the system unnoticed because it doesn't yet match any known pattern. The killer drives away not because he was clever, but because no one was looking for what hadn't been named yet. The years that follow are defined by escalation. Victims disappear from marginalized communities. Reports are minimized. Warnings are delayed. When concerns are raised, they're dismissed as isolated incidents. The crimes continue behind closed doors, shielded by indifference, disbelief, and the assumption that something this extreme couldn't be happening in plain sight. When the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't come from profiling or predictive work. It comes from a victim who escapes. Evidence that can't be ignored. Images that force action. Only then does the full scale of the crimes become visible. And only then does the question shift from who did this to how many times the chance to stop it was quietly passed over. The turning point doesn't come from strategy. It comes from survival. One victim manages to break free. Injured, terrified, half-dressed, still restrained, he reaches the street and finds help before the situation can be rewritten or explained away. For the first time, law enforcement isn't working with suspicion or patterns. They're working with proof that's alive and standing in front of them. When officers return to the apartment, the illusion collapses immediately. Photographs. Remains. Evidence so explicit it ends every argument at once. There is no interpretation required, no benefit of the doubt left to offer. The case shifts from investigation to containment in a matter of minutes. Interrogations follow. Confessions come faster than expected. Details spill out with a precision that confirms the worst assumptions. What once felt impossible is now documented, catalogued, undeniable. At this stage, there's no shock left, only clarity. The crimes weren't hidden. They were ignored until someone survived long enough to force the truth into the open. The third case follows the same trajectory. Respectability, community trust. A man who appears stable, successful, involved. He hosts parties. He hires young workers. He positions himself as someone with opportunity to offer. And for years, that image works. Complaints surface and disappear. Reports are taken and filed away. Warnings are rationalized. What exposes him isn't a sudden act of insight. It's accumulation. A missing person who doesn't stay missing. A receipt that shouldn't be there. A smell that can't be explained. When investigators finally gain access to the property, the truth is buried beneath the surface literally and figuratively. Once uncovered, there's no ambiguity left. The scale is larger than expected, the timeline longer, the number of victims higher than anyone was prepared to confront. At this point, the pattern is complete. Different men, different methods, same outcome. Each operated openly not because they were invisible, but because they were believed, and that belief delayed everything. By now, the common thread is impossible to ignore. These men weren't caught late because they were criminal masterminds. They were caught late because the system reacts it doesn't anticipate. Each case shows the same failure repeating under different names and faces. Information stayed local. Warnings stayed informal. Patterns stayed invisible until the damage was too large to deny. Law enforcement followed rules designed to protect rights, not to connect fragments quickly across jurisdictions. Communities trusted appearances over behavior. Victims who didn't fit the expected profile were taken less seriously. And every delay taught the offenders the same lesson: as long as they stayed within social expectations, they could keep operating. This isn't a story about evil hiding in darkness. It's about violence thriving in daylight, protected by routine hesitation and the assumption that something this extreme would be noticed immediately. It rarely is. These stories are disturbing not because they are rare, but because they are familiar. Different decades, different cities, different men, and yet the same outcome every time. The danger didn't come from shadows or secrecy. It came from normalcy. From polite conversations, trusted faces, and systems that move only after harm is undeniable. The lesson here isn't fear, it's awareness. Evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits for hesitation. Sometimes it relies on our belief that someone who looks safe must be safe. And sometimes the cost of being wrong isn't realized until years later. True crime isn't about glorifying violence. It's about understanding how easily it can persist when warning signs are dismissed and patterns are ignored. If these stories made you uncomfortable, they should. That discomfort is the point. If you found this breakdown valuable, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who cares about these stories, and subscribe for more deep dives into cases where the truth arrived far too late.